After doing the dash, I decided that I was going to actually try to hook up the gauges today. And, boy was I'm always taken by surprise with everything. Everything that seems like it's going to be easy always ends up being a real pain, especially, when it comes to a V8, like a small block Chevy, you'd think it'd be real simple, but that just was not the case. Now, a couple things. To get to, I believe I showed you in the last episode, to get to the temperature gauge, I'm not even sure what it's called, but where the temperature gauge goes into and it takes the temperature of your engine block on this particular engine, which is, you guessed it, a small block Chevy. You would think that it'd be real simple, but I had to take, the alternator off, which, wasn't that big a deal, 4 bolts. And then you can kind of get to it. It's underneath a flap and it's in between the spark plugs. But what I don't show in the video is the process that I actually fully went through. I show you, what it takes to just hook it up. Now, as you saw, I just pulled a wire out because the old one, which is right there, it probably still worked, but that wire was just chilling free in the engine, and I wasn't really sure what it went to, but apparently it didn't go to that. And there's my new one that I ran through the dash, and when you take the old plug out, clearly there's going to be antifreeze that shoots all over the place and shoots all over you because your engine block is full of antifreeze. So just beware. If you want to do this and don't want to make a mess, you can drain your antifreeze. You can drain your radiator and try to drain it as much as possible, but there's still going to be antifreeze in the block. So I just went with it. I didn't really care if I spilled a little antifreeze. I figured I'd just be quick about it, and that's exactly what I did. But in between, you have to have the Teflon tape already on your threads and have it ready to go, and you have to hope that you have the right adapter on your plug, because if you don't, then you're gonna just be leaking everywhere. You're gonna have to put the old one back in to stop the leaking, which I kind of had happen. Well, not really. I did have the right one, but I guess I'll just explain it. So, as I was hooking this up, after I hooked it up and it was all in there, and mind you can't get a wrench in here, and you can't put a socket on this because there's a tube coming out of it. So, and you can't bend this or break it because it's like a thermometer, and if you kink it, it's not going to work right. So you have to be real careful how you put this in here. And when you can't even get your hand in there, it's kind of tough to, twist this in there. It's trying to cross thread. It was a real pain in the ass, to be honest. So I get it all in, and, all is good. And then I go to put the gauge in the pod, and of course, the pod, you have to run this through the pod first. You can't disconnect the other end of this wire from the gauge. It's permanently connected. So I had to go back in after you see this process. I have to go back in and take it back out, put the old one back in, run it through the firewall all over again, and do the whole process over again. So for future reference, anyone hooking up one of these gauges, run the wire through the pod before you hook it up. Okay, mark my words, because you'll be just as irritated as I was. I wasn't really irritated at this point, to be honest. I mean, it is what it is. It was early in the day. I didn't really care. I was a little disappointed, but it is what it is. You live and you learn. So, stupid mistake. And later on, I don't even show the process, but and I'm not going to have a next video on it either, but the oil temperature, the oil pressure gauge was where I really had some problems. But because I couldn't get the bolt out of the engine block. But this video is going to focus on the temperature gauge. Now mind you, different small blocks, you know, depending on the year, you can do this in a couple different places, but you can do this in the water pump. You can do this where I just did it. It's different on different small blocks, but this was fairly easy. And then basically, you know, this car luckily runs like a clock. And this is a cold start, which you'll clearly see. I did at first. I didn't even know if I did this right because, you know, I started the car. The first thing I wanted to do was go in and make sure there wasn't any leaks or anything. Make sure the alternator was put back on correctly and tight, because that mammoth of a whatever you want to call it alternator is, you know, extremely heavy and large, and it's like the size of the engine, as you can see. So I wanted to make sure there was no leakage or any problems. And you know, it's kind of funny that I'm sitting here even explaining myself, because like this is like a no-brainer. Like hooking up a temperature gauge is really, really easy, but I had a heck of a time, and it was on a very simple car. So sitting in here and I'm like, okay, maybe it doesn't work, because this engine seems to typically run really hot. I mean, usually these old cars do, especially when you're just sitting. So I'm like, you know, kind of revving it, like trying to see if it's going to move, if the needle's going to move. And then this is sped up, by the way, like by ×8. And finally it started moving. So that was, you know, some excitement set in. I was like, okay, I did something right today, finally, after half of the day's gone trying to do a thermostat, or sorry, that's how out of it I am, a temperature gauge. So I get it going, and it's, as you can see, it's climbing. It took a very long time. I believe that I recorded this process. I recorded for 12 minutes from start to finish. And then, you know, you can, if everything's working correctly, it should, once it hits a certain temperature, go back down, because that's when your thermostat opens, and it allows coolant to flow through your engine, and it cools it back down. So right there, cooled it back down. I was very, very relieved to see that everything worked, because I wasn't sure. You don't know if your thermostat's necessarily working. It looks like things are flowing in there, and then it went back down and it stayed at about 192 after about 20-25 minutes. I just let it roll, and then went back up and checked on everything, and I was satisfied. And basically, that was my adventure for the day today. And I figured that because it was such an adventure and it took me all day for a temperature gauge, that I would at least share it. So thank you for watching. Hopefully this helps you if you do the same thing.